What's up, everyone? It is 3 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon, which means you're tuning in for cannabis legalization news, where we explain marijuana laws so you can change them. Today, we're joined by John Makowicz. He's a Michigan cannabis lawyer. We're going to get into Detroit's legacy certification and get into Michigan's recreational industry that's just booming. So let's just get right into it. How are you guys doing? Happy 2 days before the election.
Oh,
please.
Hey, how are you?
God, may the election go the way that allows this industry to grow. And then not only this industry, our podcast, by the way, is very close to being deleted on the YouTube channel. And then we'd have to start another YouTube channel, like the couple that we're on right now, ancillary ones, all because of the quasi-legal nature of our business. And John, thanks so much for joining us, because we're going to discuss something that's exciting, a new type of license and a big market. How many people are in Detroit?
I believe in the city. And first of all, thanks for having me on. Listened to you lots of times. Glad to be on the show. Now, Detroit, I think it's probably 750,000 residents with a metro region of 4.5 million. So fairly decent sized community.
Damn.
And Michigan has a huge legacy. I mean, not just medical, but you guys go back to traditional days with John Sinclair and whatnot.
Correct. Yeah. Michigan's about 10 years ago, we approved marijuana in the state, but we didn't have a process to implement it. And so cities like Detroit, Lansing, Ann Arbor have been selling marijuana in the gray market. We've officially came on board about 3 years ago. And now, as we're going to talk about, Detroit's coming online with recreational.
Nice.
Interesting. So what's the lay of the land then? If I wanted to go buy a bag of weed in Detroit, I'm assuming that I can do it at a dispensary, right?
Correct. So if you're an Illinois resident or an out-of-state resident, you would have to have a medical card. There is reciprocity here in the state.
It works.
But unfortunately, right now in the city of Detroit, it's medical only. So you would have to have a medical card to purchase marijuana in the city of Detroit. There are other communities in the state that are recreational, but as of right now, if you're in Detroit, it would only be through medical.
How is Detroit? So, I mean, Detroit's kind of got a bad reputation, right? And as far as economy, industries have been leaving you guys. Why haven't they stepped up and been like, yo, let's do recreational like now? Because it'll pull so much revenue, not just like tourism too, out of other cities coming to visit you guys.
No, it's a good question. So in 2018, this went before the voters, overwhelmingly approved, over 70% approval in the city of Detroit. But there was some hesitancy and some concern among city council and the mayor to how to do this properly for recreational. Right now, there are 75 licenses for medical in the city of Detroit. Only 4 of those are owned by African Americans. And so we're in a city that is over 80% African American, with only 4 owned by African Americans. And so what Councilmember Tate in the city wanted to come up with is, how do we do something not that's race-based, but that's Detroit-based for the city of Detroiters? Because if you look at Detroit, it's a historically disproportionate impact on marijuana as far as the level of access to capital, land, resources, the ability to get in the space, evidenced by only 4 owners, marijuana criminal convictions that exceed the national average in the city of Detroit. Detroiters have been historically excluded from the space. Most of them are tangentially involved: security guards, cashiers, the lower end spectrum of the industry. And so what I think Detroiters were trying to do here, especially Councilmember Tate, was say, how do we have a city-based ordinance that favors the people of Detroit to allow them to get access to this industry?
And that's when they came up with this new thing that they have, right? It's called the Detroit Legacy. So a certification for Detroit residents called Detroit Legacy. And then that has been defined as 3 prongs. And evidently, it sounds like, or it appears to me, that in the Detroit law, they've created a new term of art, and then they're going to reward this new term of art, just like Illinois did with quote unquote social equity. Detroit has Detroit Legacy, and it's this new term of art. So like, you've had to have lived in Detroit for 15 of the last 30 years. And how does it work beyond that? Is it just the residency, or is there also like income requirements?
No, so as you say, it's a little different than Illinois. Illinois, for theirs, had a three-prong approach. One, you had to live in a certain zip code, which was basically based on income. The criminal convictions are higher, 10 individuals who qualified under either one of those first two. Detroit's done it a little different, and there's some disagreement right now in city council whether or not they should keep this or whether or not they should amend it towards something like Illinois had, because it's city-based. It's three-pronged as well, similar to Illinois. But the first one is you have to live in the city for 15 years. Doesn't matter where, 15 out of the last 30 years, it doesn't matter where in the city you lived. So you could have lived in the most wealthy part of Detroit and still qualify. And so there's certain individuals on city council who are saying, wait a minute, that's not fair. We may end up having 75 individuals from the wealthiest districts of Detroit, Indian Village, for example, who obtain all these licenses. And that's not really what we envision. So that's one issue that, they may still have to address.
Yeah, because that happened. Because you helped some Illinois teams then as well. And so you've seen kind of like, well, if you guys just put this out there, award this, you're going to get a lot of demand, and you might just have somebody come in and try to take all the licenses. Do they have any types of license caps that are out there to help protect the equities that may be, or is it just going to be the wealthiest get everything?
No, so there are caps on the retail side of it. So Detroit has 10 licenses that are going to come into play. A few of them here in Michigan that we don't have in Illinois. For example, in Michigan, we can do consumption lounges. So Detroit is going to put a cap of 35 on that. Micro businesses, which means you can grow, process, and sell sort of like a microbrewery, but you can't take your product and put it into another establishment. 35 of those.
How big are those operations? The micro licenses, the micro business one. Well, how many plants?
150.
150 plant operation. There you go. You're talking that's busy work, but then you're probably pulling down some weight. You might be pulling down about 20-ish pounds. And then of course, if it's by plant, then because then like if it's by plant like that, there's methods that you can use to try to grow that 1 pound plant.
Yeah. But quality will still prevail at the end, because if you're selling it back to a market, no matter what. But John, with the three-tiered, with the Detroit years of living, is there also a percentage of ownership requirement too that would also ensure the licensee?
Yeah, so back to the three-prong, it is 15 out of the last 30 years, 13 out of the last 30 with a low income, and 10 out of the last 30 with a marijuana conviction. Most likely, most of those are going to be Detroiters, 15 out of the last 30 years. It is similar to what we saw in Illinois in the social equity program, 51% majority ownership. So what that means is right now there's this rush by individuals and groups to say, how do I find that individual who I can put it as the front of my potential business that I'm looking to start? So obviously we're going to see a lot of demand from Detroiters, but also a lot of demand from out-of-staters as well, similar to Illinois. Just like if you wanted to start a business in Illinois and apply for one of those 75, you had to go find a social equity applicant. Same thing here in Detroit. You have to go find a Detroit legacy applicant now.
Is there so right now, because do you represent a license? Are you helping? Is it horizontal or vertical in Michigan?
So Michigan, you can go vertical in it. You can apply for one license or no license. The only difference in Michigan compared to Illinois is if you have a grow, processing, or dispensary license, you can't apply for a transport or a testing license. So those two licenses are off, but usually most people either start with the grow or the dispensary, depending on where they can find, and then try to go vertical.
Nice.
Wow. The other thing Detroit's done to try to make this Detroit-centric, and I think there's going to be some legal challenges on this from out-of-state applicants, is that a minimum of 50% of these licenses go to Detroit legacy applicants. And what that means is that in the event that you don't get a certain number of licenses, nobody else can apply. So there always has to be that minimum 50% threshold. So if Tom wants to apply, for example, and it's going to push the Detroit legacy under 50% down to 48%, Tom's not going to get a license until another Detroit legacy applicant applies.
Oh, wow.
That sounds a lot fairer
What
than some of the other places.
But here's where it's going to get a little tricky, I think, for the courts, is Detroit legacy applicants get a 6-week window to apply.
Yeah.
And so not only do they get to apply first, they apply before the medical establishments get to apply and before any non-Detroiters or out-of-state applicants get to apply. And so, for example, if you're from Illinois or Ohio or Indiana, one of the bordering states, and you want to apply for a license, you now have to partner up with the Detroit Legacy, because all 75 of those dispensaries, all 35 of the micro businesses, all 35 of the consumption lounges are going to be applied for within that initial 6-week window.
Yeah. So, kind of like a special purposes law kind of prohibition or equal protection type thing, where you see that a lot in the Illinois lawsuits that happen, like the ones that are specifically targeted against the veterans. So, you're making this law specifically benefiting these people when it could have just been a general law. You think that's what's going to happen if they try to go through it this way?
I think so. And we've seen a case that came out of Maine this year where the federal court ruled in favor of the out-of-state applicants as well, who Maine was trying to apply a point system similar to what Illinois did. Maine ruled in favor of the out-of-state applicants and said, hey, you can't use that Maine-centric point system as part of your application. And so right now you have a system that's set up for Detroiters, which is good for Detroiters, but it's bad for example, the existing medical operators. So if you look at Illinois, for example, there was 55 medical licenses. Every one of those was able to grandfather in and get a recreational license. Here in Detroit, you can't do that unless you qualify for Detroit Legacy. And so every one of these current medical operators is going to have to give up 51% of their company in order to get rec. They'll still be able to continue their medical, but the medical, in essence, almost becomes worthless once recreational comes on board.
That does. They take over our market. It's unfortunate that the city can't protect itself against out-of-state money. I mean, it's just like if you spend $1 locally, more of that stays local, opposed to like spending $1 at Walmart, where 75% spends national needs and 25 stays local. Just seems to me shitty that you can't protect yourselves as far as the requirements go. Yeah.
Well, they're able to do the law. They're going to do the law. They've done the law. Sue them and win. And so it put the price up to the barriers of entry. But again, if you're going to talk about the type of money that they're talking about in Illinois, and Detroit's going to be a lucrative market as well, people will spend that money. It's an investment because they might be able to settle with the municipality for a license.
Well, like right now with you guys in Illinois is how everybody's suing with KPGA. That bullshit with the point system. It's like transparency needs to be happening everywhere, and if you don't get that, the big spooky somebody wins.
Big spooky somebody's always won.
Yeah, but
do you know who the president is? You think he won? No, he's still fucking president.
Speaking of, did you vote? Did you both vote? Did you both already put?
I vote in person, so Tuesday morning 6:30, I'll be voting.
Yeah, all right. Well, enjoy that 3-hour line. I'm just going to expect my mailed-in ballot to end up in a ditch somewhere. But then I remind myself this is Illinois. They'll probably count it 3 times.
But the thing is, marijuana, the conversation, the business, the industry, everything, it gets a slanted, restrictive. There's so many things that are against the consumer and the patient. Like here, I found a couple articles before we can go today. Like Ohio, their medical program, they're open for petitions. Like, if it's a medical thing, shouldn't that just be like a prescription? Why do I have to go and do a petition that has a deadline of December?
So is that for patients? That's not for license holders?
Yeah, that's for fucking patients.
Yeah, Ohio has one of the hardest criteria in order to get a medical card. So, in Michigan, you can complain of back pain, call a doctor, whoever, you'll get a medical card. It's almost impossible in Ohio.
Well, and it's just, there's so much effed up when it comes to.
I'm not living in Ohio.
Huh?
Like one of the things is I'm like, man, it's getting cold out there in Illinois. I should fly down to Florida, work there for the winter. And then I'm like, I can't grow weed. I'm
just saying, like, for Ohio to there's just too many things. Whenever it comes to cannabis, it seems it's always the consumer or the industry person involved that's going to be a loser because of all the hurdles they're putting in place for everybody. You know, that it seems extra.
No, and speaking of that, one of the things Detroit is trying to do to mitigate that is license fees, for example, are 1% of the normal fees. So, you know, in Illinois, you had to reduce it $2,500. Here, it's $50. It's $5,000 normally for a license. They got to pay 1% or $50. So, and if they don't have to have land ahead of time, and so you don't have to have property, and you're only paying $50 for your application.
And how
And
many?
so that really opens it up to almost anybody within the city.
True that, but then how are they scoring it? Is it competitive? I mean, I see that they have these waves. So first they're going to score all the legacies, then they're going to look at the medicals, and then finally they'll get to the dregs, and there won't be any licenses left by then. So who's doing the actual scoring on it?
So Detroit, for example, has always been first in, first licensed on the medical, the first 75 when they did it. They haven't said yet how they're going to do this for recreational. My guess is they'll probably have to do it in some type of blind lottery. Say, you know, here's the first 75. If they're complete, you guys get the licenses. And so really you're spending $50 for a ping pong ball to get one of these potential Detroit ones. But for someone who has had no access to the industry, you know, it gives them a chance to partner with for example, Cookies. You know, Cookies is medical in Detroit. They don't have recreational. And so somebody who gets one of the 75 is going to be able to go to a Cookies of the world and say, hey, if you want to be rec, partner with me.
We just had the first cookie store open up here in Washington, in Tacoma. And you know, this cannabis thing that when we were younger, and it was always like, you get whatever you got, you know, and now you got brands, like, you know, which is crazy to me.
Mm-hmm.
They had brands back then. I mean, like, well, the strain was the brand. So, like, if you came up with ChemDog, dude, you were rich, or weird things would start happening to you because everybody wanted that, you know, that particular strain. So, like, I mean, like the guys who made OG Kush or Headband or frickin' Sour Diesel, those guys made a lot of money, or at least saw a lot of money. I mean, like, that's billions of dollars in those 3 strains.
Well, in those days too, that market was about seeds, really, right? Because I mean, you couldn't really guarantee everything's a blue dream when I bought it from Joe, the guy behind the back alley. But if I were to get seeds, more than likely it would be that strain that you're talking about.
But some strains are like clone only, and so like, you know, those seeds, that was just, you know, it's like it, but you know, you're going to still use that name so that people will buy your seeds. Like the OG Kush that I just grew, that wasn't OG Kush. It was a seed though, so it was like it. Yeah.
So John, when are the lawsuits going to start coming in? What do you think?
I was on a call last week with a bunch of the medical operators and their attorneys, and you know, they're contemplating it right now. Obviously, Detroit City Council is proposing to pass this on the 24th before they go on their holiday break. Mm-hmm. So my guess is, you know, probably the day after, as soon as they pass this, then you'll probably see license or lawsuits start flying. But like I said, you know, for average Detroiters, you know, normal Detroiters who can't get in the industry, this is an easy way for somebody to get in. You know, there are some hoops that they have to jump through, but compared to some other states and some other cities, this opens the door for a lot of people who would never have access to this industry.
Yeah, so those programs are in place right now?
What's that?
Those programs are in place right now?
Which ones?
For the local Detroit guy to pay, you know, $50 instead of $5,000.
No, so once the ordinance takes effect, they can apply to become a Detroit Legacy applicant, and then there's a window on April 1st where applications are submitted and due. So they have the month of April to get their applications into the city. But one of the requirements to obtain a license, either provisional or the actual license, is you have to be pre-qualified by the state. So Michigan's a little different than Illinois in that you go through a 2-part process, one with the state, one with the city. Pre-qualification is the state saying, I'm okay with that company and those individuals from a background perspective. That takes on average probably 2 to 4 months for them to go through. And so anybody who wants to apply for a Detroit license, they should probably start that process before year end if they still want to be able to qualify for that.
Do they offer any reduced for that initial process for applicants who are disenfranchised means to get in as well, or does everybody have to pay the same for the background check and all that stuff?
The state, no. So at the state level, there are certain law firms that'll do it on reduced rates. They've simplified the process. Probably in June, they came out with new rules. So previously, pre-quals were probably costing somebody between $10,000 and $50,000 because they go into line by line of your bank accounts, tax records, everything. Now the average price for pre-qual in the state, regardless of which law firm you're doing, is probably $3,000 to $6,000. So just by simplifying the process, they've reduced the prices, that the consultants and professionals are charging.
That's a good thing, like make it up in volume, but then also, have more people that have this opportunity to get into the industry. And so I do like how they created this legacy aspect of it to try to reward it. And again, cannabis is local. Why aren't you going to self-deal if you're going to try to enrich this community? Sure, you open up the gates, but then if you have these sophisticated MSOs that are already operating in other places come in and suck up all the licenses, and all that money goes to corporate, you haven't really benefited the population.
Yeah.
So, but then of course, then it is that legal? According to the holding out of Maine, it looks like no. We haven't seen how Illinois is going to rule on the veteran issue. Similar theories, and so it's going to be pretty fascinating. And I'm assuming it's going to be similar theories in this court case that will probably be filed in the Detroit federal. Because then they get slightly, I'm assuming it's in their federal court. It's fascinating, but I'm glad that they have this process up. So you go and you pay $3 to $6 grand to get pre-qualified, and then you've reviewed the actual municipal ordinance so that you've kind of familiarized yourself with what the application it's going to be. How many hundreds of pages are we looking at there?
Since it's not a competitive application, the page limit's probably still the same. You're probably still talking 150 pages worth of material, but you're not going to pay you're not going to pay the same price as you would on a competitive one. So certain communities in Michigan are competitive, similar to what we saw at the state level for Illinois for dispensaries. Others aren't. It doesn't appear at this point that Detroit is going to be a competitive one, and so that just means that you have to turn in a business plan, a staffing plan, odor plan that meets the requirements of the statute. And if it does, and you get one of those ping pong balls, you'll end up with your license. So that should reduce some of the costs for the individuals. But the other thing, though, for Detroit is they didn't put a cap on processing and they didn't put a cap on growing.
Nice.
And so obviously everybody wants the retail licenses because of demand and volume and the amount of money that you can make there. But there's still a lot of money to be made growing and processing as well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I really like the processor's license. I think that's where a lot of the action is for the industry itself, and also for the ability to be able to make a cross-border brand, because then you really have, distilled it out, and then a hamburger is a hamburger if you get it at McDonald's, no matter what zip code. And it's similar to that, as opposed to when you're actually farming. And so those farming methods and the sun that it was grown in, the humidity, all that stuff is going to be a little bit more, esoteric. But that's really cool. So then it wouldn't necessarily become Detroit's not going to become a huge weed farm because there's an unlimited number of cultivator licenses. How does the city then, the municipality kind of limit the number of licenses that they have for the cultivation if there's no set limit?
So most of those limited by zoning requirements. So they'll set up certain zones within the city that you can grow. And then also certain requirements that you can't be within 1,500 feet of a school or a church or certain things
or
like
other growers or so. So eventually there's only so many that you can have and you don't have to put a license limit in, but it's still limited. Yeah.
At that point, it's still about space.
Yeah.
But one of the other differences between Illinois and Michigan that, makes those grow and processing a little more valuable compared to retail is Michigan allows home delivery now. Ooh. And so I can have my licenses outside Detroit and still service into the city and vice versa. And so even if I don't get one of the 75 and I get one that's right in a suburb right outside the city limits, I could still be doing just as much volume if my marketing, my delivery, everything else is just as competitive.
Yeah, and there's still a great real estate play. I mean, you're talking about 75 retail establishments and 35 consumption lounges. So how much overlap do you think is going to be there? A multi-unit commercial building that has that shop where you buy this product adjacent to this consumption lounge. That's going to be pretty neat.
That's an awesome street.
My guess is most of those retail are also going to be applying for the consumption lounges at the same time.
I bet. Or like the micro business. So for the micro business, how much like a craft brewing experience can it be? Can I have a tasting room at my micro business if I have that license?
Not in, so you would have to get a consumption lounge as well. So the other thing for the micros are set up by the state really to be a license where it doesn't cost as much money to apply and to get. But if you have a grow, processing, or dispensary, you can't get a micro. So it's basically a separate class of licenses that the bigger players in the state aren't going to be able to use.
Yeah, I like it. And I wish Illinois had a micro business license, to be honest. That would be great. Like maybe not necessarily an unlimited number, but one of these unlimited, limited numbers where they could use zoning at the community level to set the actual number of limits. But that would be cool.
You bring up a great point, though, about the unlimited license and in the city. Eventually, it's going to cap out because of space. But also, people worry all the time about like unlimited license or too many license. But in the end, doesn't quality win or capitalism? Like, isn't that what this is all about, anyways? Like quality, your branding, and all that stuff.
Correct. Yeah, it's the same in any other industry, and every other state's gone through this as well. But, Michigan still has a supply issue. And until they, get some equilibrium on that, I think you're going to still see a large influx of new growers, given the fact that everybody still wants to be vertical as well. And so everyone that has a dispensary, most of them are going to apply for grow licenses so they can service their own stores. Michigan doesn't have the same requirements that Illinois does, for example, where I believe it's 40% is the most that you could go into one dispensary. And so right now you get a lot of existing people within the state saying, hey, I got to go vertical. But then you get also the out-of-state players who come into the state and say, hey, I can grow better than these guys from Michigan, or I can grow because we've been doing it in other states. And so right now we see a lot of out-of-state applicants coming into Michigan because, especially on the grow side, we don't have a tax on our cultivation. So we have a 10% tax on the retail side, no tax on the grow, no tax on the processing, which makes it attractive to a lot of out-of-state growers, especially in the surrounding states. So it's fairly easy to come in. If you're in Illinois or Ohio or Pennsylvania, you're going to spend six figures, 100, 150,000 to potentially get a license. It's a competitive application to get a 5,000 square foot canopy space in Illinois.
It could go up to 14,000, but first you have to get that 5,000. Yeah.
Correct. And I had clients from Illinois who turned in an Illinois application at the same time, a Michigan application at the same time. They're already licensed and growing here in Michigan. And as you know, in Illinois, it's lawsuits. Yeah. So, that shows you the ease of access to the market. Obviously, I don't think it's going to oversaturate too fast just because, a good grow operation is still going to cost somebody $1 million, $2 million. And so you still have to have capital to come into the state.
Yeah. No, it's high. The stuff still ain't free. Just because you can get and you can start growing there doesn't mean it's going to be like zero cost. But then at least it's just the cost as opposed to that gamesmanship where it's like, oh, you have to have the best application. No, we're going to have a 1,400 page application. It's going to be six figures. Well, we hope you win.
In the end, any of these recreational states and markets, you got to have big money to play. The only one you don't have to be is in Oklahoma.
Well, I don't know. How much is a micro business license operation going to cost? We should have one of the micro business license holders on the show so that we can go over his P&Ls and his books.
Well, if you're micro, I'd imagine you're going to start at least with 100,000. Even because you're talking the place, the seeds, the time to pay your employees, just the guarding. Because like you said earlier, Tom, about the producer processor part, this is actually the hardest part, because you have to be consistent, right, to create that McDonald's. Here in Washington, we are horizontal. There's no vertical brands. And so kind of like the stores are like, well, okay, great. I got a bunch of stores competing to be the best Apple store. There's not that what it used to be where it was vertical. And like I talked to the bud tender, yeah, man, I just got done, tending to the trimming or whatever, because they were part of the process. They were part of the garden as well as being part of the store. A lot of times back in the day when it was vertical, I think we missed that. But the fact that you guys, and that's the other thing too about cannabis. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Missouri, but right now they're going through a bunch of lawsuits as well. This one, people are trying to sue, and there's the governor is saying, look, they're going to defend the state side of things, because again, it's another KPG grading issue. It's how did you decide who gets the license?
That's right. It's the state picking winners and losers, and so they just all start fighting. But then in Michigan, it's more along the lines of, well, were you there first? Okay, we were accepting applications. Your application number 7. Yeah.
Should be.
Well, I mean, I like that better. I think it's just more fair. Same with Oklahoma. You're able to just open and then go into business. When you try to and I realize the municipal level is the right level to limit the licenses. And so yes, I like how they do the 2-step system, and they also do that in California. So it sounds like the California licensing structure is more similar or more in line with the Michigan licensing structure.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. They're pretty comparable. But the one thing that most of the cities in Michigan do, especially on the dispensary side, is they try to make it centric to their city. And so they're going to say, because a lot of the dispensary ones are merit-based and the rest of them aren't, they're going to say, okay, you have to renovate this building, you have to take a vacant building, you have to do something where you're not displaced in a business, you have to hire so many people from our community, so many business owners from our community have to be on your team. And so they're really trying to make it say, okay, we're going to allow you guys to come into our community, but you're going to do it in a way that benefits our community, creates jobs, revitalizes an area that perhaps is downtrodden, as opposed to going where you want to go. I had some out-of-state people from California in last month, and they were complaining that they couldn't get certain areas of certain communities. And you had to explain to them that, communities here don't necessarily care about that. They want to see the bad parts of their community fixed through marijuana, as opposed to putting, a dispensary next to Starbucks.
Right. And that's reminds me of just reviewing the Fresno application, because Fresno's got an application window going on right now. And I'm like, oh yeah, that was a part of the application that was stuck in the back of my head. 200 pages. So, it's going to take you several hours to draft, 200 pages, go. All right. I mean, fortunately, after having some applications, you see what they're asking for, but then you still have to go through and make sure that it complies with the particular regulations that you're looking at. So Michigan and California also have the similarity. So it does become a very, very local thing. And you have to look at whatever particular municipality's regulations when you're putting in the application for that particular municipality, as opposed to like in Illinois, where they were all set from on high, the state application, and then the state picks winners and losers. We can see same with Missouri, we can see how well those are both working or not.
Well, how crazy is it that this hippie drum circle industry, with the capitalists winning, that they're fighting, they're suing to own more than 51%, is kind of disenfranchising the local people, no matter what state they're in. No matter if they have to be the dominant shareholder. It's bullshit, I think. But
tough. Yeah.
Well, I think you got to put some protections in there, because otherwise you're always going to have the out-of-state players come into town and take every single one of those licenses. If you look at Detroit's social equity program that they put in place along with theirs, so if somebody gets a license in Detroit, they got to hire 51% of their residents from Detroit. They got to buy 50% of their goods and services from Detroit businesses. 1% of their revenue goes back to Detroit, and they got to put 750 hours to a Detroit-based charity. And so you can do certain city-based programs like that, but unless there's some ownership in there, just because you're hiring people doesn't necessarily mean that Detroiters or people from Seattle or Chicago, wherever, are benefiting because it's the owners who get generational wealth. The workers never get that. And so the only way to do that is to make sure that some of the local residents can become owners.
Yeah. And I think they're trying their best to do it, but then it just, is that a special law that benefits those people at the exclusion of other people, and that, and violates their equal protection or whatever? I would need to read the lawsuit that came out of Maine that they kind of raised this, where it's talking about specific points going to the specific people and to the exclusion of others. But it appears that's the way the litigation is blowing. What else would you want to educate your clients on who are thinking about opening a dispensary in Detroit?
I would think, for somebody who is not from Detroit, it's finding that Detroit legacy person that you can trust, that you can partner with. There's going to be a lot of people that come into this industry that I think are going to try to especially scam the Detroiters, who are going to say, hey, I'm going to make you the 51% owner, but there's going to be such provisions in the document that basically negate that. And so, my concern for anyone from Detroit or anyone who is a potential Detroit legacy applicant is, make sure you have counsel looking that over. So that way, whoever you're trying to partner with isn't necessarily going to take advantage of you, because there's so many ways that a good lawyer can draft a document. So even though you're 51% owner on paper, in reality, you're never going to see 51% of the profits. And so, make sure you're protected is really, my advice to anyone looking to get into any one of these social equity states, whether it's Illinois, Detroit, wherever it is.
Yeah. And that happened in Illinois as well. And then many people don't understand how they set up these entities, especially for the cannabis touching entities, and how that license might just be holding that particular entity, the right to grow or sell that cannabis. But then there's these other entities that are affiliated and related. Maybe they have the real estate or the IP or the management, and then they're just passing money all back and forth between one another. And so, sure, the license holder had to have that 51-49% ownership breakdown. But by the end of the day, that license holder owes us $2.26, by the way. It runs at a small loss. That complexity of the industry, I think, is also something to try to really, educate to people wanting to get in.
Oh, John, okay.
No, I was going to say, the other good thing Detroit's done that Illinois didn't do, for example, is you have to maintain your Detroit legacy status in order to keep the license. I know a lot of Illinois applicants, for example, who had provisions in their applications and their operating agreements to buy these social equity individuals out basically the minute they were allowed to do it.
Right.
Yeah. Here they're saying, no, we're not going to play that game. We're going to make sure somebody's a Detroit legacy applicant, and they're going to stay that way. But I agree with Tom, good lawyers can make sure that no money ever flows out of that.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and not only that, that's the point. And that's why they hired me or John to do that, was because that's how we sold value. It took us our time. It's quite complex, and then there's probably going to be an audit somewhere. Your financial advisor was also probably on board and involved, because, you're trying to get around this IRC 280E. And so, Miggy, you were talking about back in the day when the growers would also be trimming the products. Yeah, that's what you would do. You would have them go work on COG time so you could deduct the costs. So you would say, hey, quit man in the shop. We can't deduct that. Go trim, and so then they could deduct their time when they're trimming or pre-roll rolling, that kind of stuff.
Well, the manipulation of the contract too, because John, I don't know if you're familiar with Paul Stanford of Oregon. He, in the early days of medical, created this medical where doctor people could get scripts and whatnot. He did a contract with a company based out of Israel, working out of Canada, and they finagled some numbers, did something, and he doesn't own the thing that he started anymore. And matter of fact, they were trying to sue him to stop using his name. That's how shady and good the contract was that he lost out on. $1 million company that he was running.
True. No, but there's a lot of people who want to get into the industry, whether it's Chicago, Seattle, Detroit, wherever. And, I always encourage people, if you want to get into the industry, it may not necessarily be in your backyard, just because your backyard isn't perhaps the easiest industry to get into. And so, my recommendation is, people watching and listening, if you really want to get into the space, what if you have a relative in Detroit, for example, if you have a cousin, a coworker, somebody you went to college with, see if they want to be that Detroit legacy applicant, because you may not want to wait 2 years in Illinois, or you may not want to wait for New York to come on board next year. You get a license in Detroit, you've just been able to capitalize whatever it is you want to do for your second set of grow wherever in the country. So, take advantage of that, because you can apply anywhere in the country.
Right. And that's the other thing, like Josh Kincaid and I will be talking about some orphan licensed in Washington State, because it's just in a rural area. So it's like, it might make $4.25 a week, but yeah, we have a license. We operate that. And I also have family in South Dakota. So Tuesday, South Dakota, vote to legalize it. The family needs you, man. And that'd be great, because then what did you do? Well, I helped my brother-in-law's family get a cannabis license in South Dakota. That'd be cool.
Yeah, but Tom, just to piggyback on that, one of the benefits to that, even as you're applying for merit-based licenses around the country, is if you got something in Oregon or Oklahoma or Michigan, or a state where it's easier to get a license, you're going into that city or that state now as a licensed operator in another state.
Right.
That makes your application a lot better, a lot more competitive than someone who is trying to break into the state for the first time.
That's right.
That's great advice about the if you have family in Detroit. I mean, Tom, we had Kush on here in Washington back in the early days when it was open licensing. He bought his license for $2,000, and now he could sell it for, I think, a retarded six-figure. And he's just doing the business. And if people can just get their chance to get their foot in the door, that'd be great.
Or even if they don't, they're just ambitious and they, hop on a Detroit Facebook forum or wherever, Michigan-based one, and find somebody that's a Detroit resident and say, hey, do you want to partner up with me on this? I'll pay the cost, I'll pay the fees, because you can put contracts in place that'll protect you for your partner. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you got to have some trust there. But, when everybody got their social equity applicants for Illinois, for example, I would venture a majority of them never met those individuals before they went on those applicants. Come June of last year, they didn't know those social equity applicants, but they had to put them on there. So same thing for Detroit, go find somebody in that city and say, let's get a business here.
Yeah. And I hope that you guys don't have the full-on litigation that we had, because in theory, they could have filed that same lawsuit that they filed against the veteran points against the entire social equity aspect of the license itself. No, this is a special law. You're only preferencing these people. They're going to get all the licenses. Well, that's true, but it's also the point. So I'm not sure how the Detroit litigation is going to wind up. But after the show, I'll have to hit you up for the case that came out of Maine, because I haven't even read that one.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. No, but Detroit's fully anticipating, in their press conference when they introduced the ordinance, they talked about how people have already emailed and called and said they're going to sue, and their attitude was basically, bring it on. We think this is good for Detroiters, and so we're going to defend it. So, as an attorney, I think that there are probably some questions with the ordinance as it relates to out-of-state people or compliance. But, I think Detroit just wants to move forward and say, we're going to take care of the people of our city. And for those of you who don't like it, too bad.
Nice.
John, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can we go to find and follow what you got going on at Marshall and Melhorn?
Marshall Melhorn, correct, yeah.
No, just marshallandmelhorn.com? Is that what it is?
Yeah, marshall-melhorn.com.
Sweet. Awesome. Thanks again for coming on, and thanks for tuning in. Everyone, make sure you like, subscribe to keep up with all cannabis legalization news. We'll see you on Wednesday for our post-election show. Fingers crossed.
Thank you, everyone.